Good morning. Welcome to the UW Retirement Association's Committee for Financial Matters and Retirement presentation this morning on identity theft and data breach awareness, presented by Ms. Laura Fay. She is the agency liaison for the Bureau of Consumer Protection. That's within the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. As the agency liaison, Laura is empowered to go around and present information to the public, to police organizations, and to businesses about consumer protection issues. She travels around the state doing that, and she's a graduate of the University of Washington, Seattle, originally. She then moved to Madison, got her master's degree in public affairs from the UW-Madison, and she started her background in financial education when she started to work for the credit union not too long ago. But she's been with DATCAP for about 3 years now, she was with us about 2.5 years ago, and we welcome her back. Thank you very much. Be nice to her.
Well, thank you, Jack, for inviting me to speak here today. I'm so happy to be here. Jack gave me a great introduction, but my name is Laura Fay. I am the agency liaison with the Bureau of Consumer Protection for the state of Wisconsin. And we are the state's primary consumer protection agency. So we receive complaints from consumers all over the state of Wisconsin related to different consumer issues. Some of our more popular complaint categories are landlord-tenant complaints. So if you rent a home or an apartment and you have issues with your landlord or the contract, you can file a complaint with us. Auto repair or home repair, these are other popular complaint categories. If you have work done on your car and they didn't do the work they said they would do, or you weren't satisfied with the work the mechanics did with your car, you can call in and file a complaint with us. If you have contractors come in to do work on your home and they don't follow the contract, again, you can file a complaint with us. Telemarketing and telecommunication complaints. Actually, telemarketing is our #1 complaint year after year. Those are all of those phone calls you get all the time that you don't want to be receiving. But we also receive a lot of complaints related to identity theft. So I'm here to talk to you about identity theft, and in particular, with everything that's going on with the data breaches and the Equifax data breach, we're going to have a focus on the data breaches and the laws and the state statutes that regulate that. So today, this is the agenda for the day. I'll talk about identity theft. I'll talk about what it is, the state statutes in Wisconsin, the federal state statutes that regulate identity theft and the definitions under that. We'll talk about how it happens. So there's some high-tech versions and some low-tech versions of identity theft, but a lot of different ways that these identity thieves can get a hold of your personal information. So we'll go over all the tools and different strategies they use to get a hold of that personally identifiable information. I'll talk about warning signs of identity theft, ways you could tell that the identity theft is taking place on your various accounts or what might tip you off to that. We'll go over how to protect yourself, prevention tips and strategies, things you can do to prevent the identity theft from happening before it begins. And then finally, I'll talk about what to do if you do become a victim of identity theft, the steps you can take to recover from being victimized by this type of crime and clearing your credit report of those fraudulent charges or any liability of financial charges as well. So this here would be the definition of identity theft. It's the misuse, or you could even say the abuse, of someone else's personal information to fraudulently obtain money would be the big one. Goods, services, a job, employment. Medical treatment, this would be the misuse of insurance information to obtain medical benefits. Government benefits, this would be if someone got a hold of your social security number and they're using this to apply for food share benefits, unemployment insurance, especially during the tax season. We see a lot of tax fraud. Somebody got a hold of your personal information and they use this to file a tax return before you had a chance to do so. So anything related to government benefits, or even to hide from law enforcement. So these are criminals. They may even have a warrant out for their arrest. They got a hold of your personal information and they use it in place of their own because they're trying to evade arrest or law enforcement. So I said it's the misuse of personally identifiable information. Well, what does this mean? Well, it would be your full name, but not just your name. It's your name in combination with a couple other pieces of information, such as your address, phone number, social security number, driver's license or passport number, your date of birth, any financial account numbers you might have, so any savings or checking accounts, loans or lines of credit you have out under your name, debit or credit cards tied to those accounts, anything related to your financial accounts, PIN numbers or passwords attached to those accounts, and biometric data. So biometric data would be a fingerprint, iris or retina scan, voice or facial recognition. But an identity thief will do the most damage if they can get a hold of your name in combination with your social security number and your date of birth. Because with that information, they can start to create what's called a synthetic profile or a fake profile, and they can use this to make purchases on your accounts as if it were you making purchases on your own accounts. Now, there is a Wisconsin state statute that regulates identity theft. That's state statute 943.201. And under that state statute, the provision that identifies what is personally identifiable information, this is the list that's covered under that state statute. It makes identity theft a Class H felony, which could be a maximum of 6 years in prison or up to a $10,000 fine. These statistics here are coming out of the Federal Trade Commission. Every year, the Federal Trade Commission puts out a report called the Consumer Sentinel Network Report. And these statistics here are showing the top 10 complaint categories reported by the FTC in 2016. So if you can see up here is identity theft. It was ranked number 3 for their complaints. So roughly 400,000 complaints related to identity theft, or it made up about 13% of the total complaints that the Federal Trade Commission received in 2016. So this would be at the national level. And actually, identity theft was the #1 complaint reported to the FTC for 15 years in a row. And as of 2015, it dropped down to the #2 spot. In 2016, it did drop down to the #3 spot. We'll have to see where it lands for 2017. But this is just to give you an idea that identity theft really is a major issue nationwide. So some facts about identity theft. It is the fastest growing crime in the United States. And there is agreement across all levels of law enforcement, local police, the Federal Trade Commission, the FBI, that this is the fastest growing crime in the United States. About every 2 seconds, someone becomes a victim of identity theft. In 2016, there were 1,093 reported data breaches. And of those 1,093 reported data breaches, about 360 million pieces of information was compromised. So at this point in the presentation, I usually like to ask people in the audience how many of you have ever been affected by a data breach, but now with Equifax, it's probably safe to say that at least half of us. Has anyone here been affected by a breach other than Equifax? Well, can somebody share what one of those, what was it? Was that with the OPM? Oh, Anthem, okay. Anyone else? Target, okay. Anyone else? What do y'all want to? IRS, okay. So we see a lot of different types of data breaches every single day. And there's different versions of these data breaches. With the case of Target affected a lot of people. That was 70 million people who were affected by the Target breach. That was a malware intrusion. So in the case of Target, the identity thieves put malware on the point of sale network of Target stores. So anybody who swiped their debit or credit card through one of those point of sale machines at a Target store during the time of that breach, their debit or credit card information was compromised. So we see a lot of different types of breaches. Any Yahoo account users in here? Yahoo email? Did you get that message to change and update your password? So everybody heard the news about Yahoo. So the Yahoo data breach, this was a politically motivated data breach. By a state actor. And actually, in the case of Yahoo, it wasn't such sensitive information they got a hold of. In that case, it was login credentials for your email accounts. But then it would be a question of what information is kept on your Yahoo email account. And in the case of Yahoo, they were able to catch the people responsible for that attack. So in the case of Yahoo, it was 2 Russian officials, and the FBI and the Federal Trade Commission went in, and they indicted them. And there was a total of 49 counts for that data breach, and I'm not sure what all of them were, but I know that there was 1 count of cyber espionage, 1 count of economic espionage, 3 counts of aggravated identity theft. So they do catch the thieves sometimes. I always get that question. And of course, we're not law enforcement, so that's not our side of it, so we don't have a lot of information on how often they catch the criminals. But this is just to show you the range we see and the different types of data breaches we see. So of everyone who raised their hand, whose information was compromised as a result of a data breach, how many of you actually saw fraudulent charges on your accounts after the data breach or had money taken out of your account fraudulently? And they actually got money from you, or your bank informed you of it and closed the card? But they didn't get anything. The bank got it. They caught it before they got the money. So in that case, where they got a hold of your credit card information, was it just you specifically, or had your credit card been compromised prior in a data breach? Oh, with a skimmer. Okay, so that was more an individual case. And the banks are really good. The banks are really the first line of defense, and they have their own fraud department. So I'm sure at some point or another, many of us in this room have received a call from the bank trying to verify a certain purchase on your account. And if it was fraudulent, they'll ask to close that card, and they'll send you a new card with a new number attached to that. And that's the same idea with a lot of these data breaches. Is if you've ever received one of those notification letters in the mail, it means your information is out there. It's been compromised. You want to be more vigilant in monitoring your accounts, but you are not yet necessarily a victim of identity theft. So in a lot of the cases of these data breaches, from what I hear from victims, they never actually see the fraudulent charges on their accounts, or if they do, sometimes they'll show up a year to 2 years later, and a lot of times the bank will catch those before any money is actually taken out of the account. So those affected by a data breach, they are 3 times more likely to become victims of identity theft, but they will not necessarily become victims of identity theft. These are some more statistics from the Federal Trade Commission. This is showing identity theft ranking by state. And of course, I know that the letters there on the left side, that's pretty small to see, but I did highlight Wisconsin on your right-hand side there. And you can kind of see for a few years there, we were creeping up in the rankings, but as of 2016, we did drop back down to the 30th place. And this is one of those rankings where we don't want to be ranked #1. So that's good that we dropped back down. We put out at DACAP, we put out our own top 10. So again, these statistics are coming from the Federal Trade Commission, from that Consumer Sentinel Network report. So these statistics are reporting at a national level. But at the Bureau of Consumer Protection, we put out our own top 10 list, and we're seeing the same trends in identity theft. In 2015, it was ranked #3 among our complaints, and we had close to 900 complaints reported of identity theft. But in 2016, it did drop down to the #4 spot, and only about 450 complaints. So the complaints were almost halved from 2015 to 2016. So there's different types of identity theft. The one you're probably most familiar with would be the financial identity theft. These would be identity thieves who got a hold of your personal information, and they're using this to open up financial accounts. They're opening up new savings or checking accounts under your name, taking out loans or lines of credit, opening up debit or credit cards, or maybe they're making purchases on your existing debit or credit card accounts, but it would be anything affecting your financial accounts. Child identity theft is the fastest growing type of identity theft. This is anything affecting a minor. Children are actually very vulnerable and desirable targets for identity thieves because they have a clean credit history and because the identity theft goes undetected for so long. In many cases, child identity theft is not discovered until the child turns 18 and applies for credit of their own. And we also work in collaboration with many of the foster care systems. And in many cases, we see that the child identity theft is actually perpetrated by a member of the family or someone who knows the child well. Not necessarily with malicious intent. Sometimes these are people who need social security number for employment purposes, but they're not thinking about what the consequences could be for that child when they turn 18 and want to apply for credit of their own. So for example, I had a mom call in to us to file a complaint. She had gone to apply for food share benefits for herself and her 6-year-old son. And when she went to apply for those food share benefits, she discovered that someone else had already applied using her son's social security number. So she went to investigate and see what was going on, and she found AT&T accounts opened up under his name, Dish Network cable accounts opened up under his name. He had debt and collection companies after him. His credit was destroyed, and he's only 6 years old. So that mom is going to have a lot of work ahead of her working with us and working with the credit reporting agencies to make sure that her son's name is cleared of those fraudulent charges so that when he turns 18 and wants to apply for credit of his own, he'll be working from a clean slate and a clear credit history. Medical identity theft, this is the misuse of insurance information to obtain medical benefits. This type of identity theft can be very harmful to the victim because it could alter your medical records. So let's say you have a life-threatening allergy to a certain type of medication. An identity thief has been using your medical information, your insurance information to order prescription medications, go have visits with the doctor, having procedures or surgeries done. Well, this could be very harmful to the health of the victim in this case. Other consequences I've seen of the medical identity theft is all of a sudden the victim has noticed that their insurance premiums are rising and they're not sure why. Well, this is because an identity thief has been using their insurance information to order all these different prescription medications, have these procedures done. Maybe they're ordering these medications for themselves, maybe they're going and reselling these, but then this is causing the premiums of the victim's insurance, in this case, to rise. Criminal identity theft, this is the criminal aspect. These are identity thieves who are hiding from law enforcement. They may even have a warrant out for their arrest. They somehow got a hold of your personal information, they use it in place of their own, and now there could even be a warrant out for your arrest. This type of identity theft is not so common, but we do see it from time to time. We did have someone call in a while back to file a complaint with us because there's a warrant out for his arrest in the state of Oregon, and he's never even been to Oregon before in his life. So somebody got a hold of his personal information and used it in place of their own to evade arrest. Here are some more statistics from the Federal Trade Commission. This is showing identity theft specific to the state of Wisconsin and breaking it down by the type of identity theft we see. So the most common type of identity theft that we see is that employment or tax-related fraud. So somebody's using your social security number for employment purposes, or especially during the tax season, we see a lot of these fraudulent tax returns coming through. People get a notification that somebody used their information to file a tax return before they had a chance to do so. Credit card fraud, this could be someone using your personal information to open up new credit cards or making purchases on your existing credit card accounts. Moving down the list a little bit, phone or utilities fraud. These are identity thieves who are opening up utilities accounts under your name here in Madison, MG&E, or water utility bills, or cell phone or landline phone accounts under your name. Down there at the bottom, government documents or benefits fraud. So that example I gave of the mother who she went to apply for those food share benefits and somebody had already applied using her son's information. That would be an example of government benefits or documents fraud. Down there at the bottom, you can see other. This is kind of a silver lining. These are people who had the tools in place to prevent the identity theft before it happened, and they reported it to the Federal Trade Commission. And then this graph here is showing identity theft by age. It kind of shows you identity theft can happen to people of any age. But one thing we think is misrepresented here is that 19 and under category. Because as I was explaining earlier with the child identity theft, in many cases, child identity theft goes unreported until that child turns 18 and is applying for credit of their own. So we think that the child identity theft in many cases is actually showing up in that 20 to 29-year-old category because it's not being reported until that child is an adult and applying for credit of their own. And then in many cases, people hear that seniors are really targeted at higher rates for identity theft, which as you can see here from these statistics is not the case. Actually, seniors are targeted at much higher rates for the scams, but not identity theft in particular. And I'll go over some of the more popular scams we see from year to year as well later on in the presentation. So what are the potential harms of identity theft? The big one would be direct financial losses. These identity thieves, they get a hold of your personal information. They're using this to open up new accounts under your name. They're taking out loans under your name. Maybe they're making purchases on your existing accounts. And then this creates kind of a domino effect. That in turn will cause damage to your financial status or your credit score because now they've opened up these accounts. They're taking out loans. Maybe they're racking up debt. There's collection companies coming after you, so this will negatively affect your credit standing, which in turn can result in denial of employment or housing. Because nowadays, a lot of employers are using the credit report as another form of a background check when they're vetting new employees to see if this is somebody responsible and reliable that they'll be hiring on to their organization. Or if you go to rent a home or an apartment, they'll run that credit report background check on you to make sure that you're reliable and making those monthly payments on time. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. Let's see, civil judgments or criminal records. So now if you have a debt that's gone into collections, or with that example of the criminal identity theft, in many cases we actually see people who have to hire a lawyer and go to court to prove that they're not the one responsible for those criminal charges. And then all of this can be very time-consuming and costly to recover from. So with the example I gave of that mom with her 6-year-old son, although it will be easy for her to prove that he did not open those accounts, because of course he's only 6 years old, it'll still be very time-consuming for her to work with us and the credit reporting agencies to make sure that he's cleared of all of those fraudulent charges. And the example of the criminal identity theft, having to go to court and hire a lawyer, this can all be very time-consuming and costly. And then finally, just the emotional harm, the sense of being victimized by this type of crime, and the loss of trust that can go along with that. So how it happens, I said, there's some high-tech versions and some low-tech versions of identity theft, but these identity thieves, they use a lot of different strategies to get a hold of your personal information. One of the low-tech versions of identity theft would be dumpster diving or stolen mail. So these would be identity thieves who are actually digging through your trash. They're looking for anything containing sensitive or personal information on it. So, for example, when you receive a statement from your bank, when you're done reading that and you throw it away, they can get a lot of information about your financial accounts that way. Or an explanation of benefits from your insurance company, when you're done reading that and you throw it in the trash, a lot of information about your medical record and your insurance information. Or they might even steal these documents right out of your mailbox before you get a chance to open them. But they're looking for anything containing sensitive or personal information that they can then use to commit fraud. Social networking, this is another popular tool that identity thieves use to find personal information on people. How many people here have a profile on social media? So not too many. I give this presentation a lot with high school students, and that's really focused on the social media aspect of everything. And of course, everyone in those audiences has an account on social media. And then I do a little survey with them. I say, okay, how many of you on your social media profile have shared your full name, the hometown where you were born, and your full date of birth, including the year? And then the next slide I show them is a picture of the Social Security card. So if you picture the Social Security card in your head, you have the first 3 numbers, the middle 2, and the last 4, right? And so the first 3 numbers of the Social Security card are the area number, and those were given out based on the hometown where you were born, and it would be a range. So if you were born here in Madison, you'd fall within this range of 10 numbers. And then the middle 2 are the group number, and those were given out based on where you were born and the year you were born. And the last 4 are the serial number, and it's a random number, but they were given out in sequential order based on birth. So they say a sophisticated computer was able to accurately guess the Social Security number of anyone who shared their full name, full date of birth, including the year, and the hometown they were born somewhere on their social media profile. And so, especially with the high school students, a lot of them have Facebook. And on Facebook, you can share your birthday, and it's fun because then all your friends know when your birthday is and they can wish you a happy birthday. So I'll say, well, why don't you just share the day and the month and not include the year, and then everyone still knows it's your birthday. So kind of thinking about how to limit that information you're sharing. All of these social networking and social media sites have privacy policies, so you can read and understand those and learn how you can limit the information you're sharing and who has access to that information. If you go to ssa.gov, they have a little blog about the history of the Social Security number. So actually that scenario that I just shared probably doesn't apply to everyone in this room. It would for students in high school currently. It's changed how they've issued that number over the years. And as of 2010, I believe, they've completely randomized the Social Security number. So anyone 7 and younger would have a completely randomized Social Security number. Skimming devices. You mentioned the skimming devices earlier. Are people here familiar with skimming devices and how those work? Some people. Okay, so skimming devices, and we hear about these in the news a lot, and for those of you who have heard of skimming devices, where do you more often hear of them? Gas stations, exactly. So we mostly hear about them on gas pumps, on gas stations, but they can really be placed at any point of sale machine. Again, anywhere where you're swiping your card through to make that purchase. And the way the skimming devices work is it's a device identity thieves will overlay on any point of sale machine. It looks just like the reader. It looks like the same piece where you're swiping your card through. And in fact, it is the same piece. We work very closely with law enforcement, and they can buy these devices on underground markets, on dark web markets online, and it's the exact same piece. So you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it. But you'd think that these identity thieves would put the skimming devices on these machines in the middle of the night or at some time where they'd be less suspicious. But apparently they'll put them on any time of day. They're easy to put on, but they're only secured in some cases with a double-sided tape or a Velcro. So if you give the skimming device a shake or a pull, a lot of times they'll come loose. But just by looking at it, you wouldn't be able to tell that it's on there. And how they work is when you go to make your purchase and you swipe your card through, the skimming device allows the identity thieves to make a clone copy of your debit or credit card. And then they can use that clone copy to make purchases on your accounts as if it were you making purchases on your own accounts. Now, one thing they're doing to combat this form of identity theft is at this point, most of the banks have issued the new chip and PIN card. Does everyone in here have a new chip and PIN card from your bank? Everyone should. And so the way the chip and PIN card works is the information is encrypted right on the card, which means it's scrambled. So every time you're using that card to make a purchase, it's like a new code that these readers are reading. Not a code that you would need to know, but a new code that the machine is reading every time you make a purchase, which would make the skimming devices impossible to use, because if they made a copy of that card, well, it's not going to work the next time they go to make a purchase. However, the downside with the chip and PIN card, which I'm sure everyone has noticed, is sometimes when you go to use your card at the store, sometimes you're swiping your card through. Sometimes you insert the card into a reader, it'll read it for a few seconds, and then you take the card back out. If you're inserting the card into the reader, you're using that new encrypted technology. You're safe from the skimming devices. But if you're still swiping your card through to make a purchase, you're still vulnerable to the skimming devices if there were a skimming device on the machine. So the way that this is working with legislation is there was a deadline for all of these retail stores to have these new readers installed, and a lot of them didn't make it. The bigger retailers did, Home Depot, Walgreens, Target, but a lot of the smaller retailers do not have these new chip-enabled devices for their point-of-sale machines. The date was October 1st of 2015 that they had to install these devices, so they missed it by quite a while now. And the gas stations, they were given a longer period of time to install these machines. I've seen some gas stations that have them, but most seem not to have them installed yet. And I believe it's probably because it's more difficult because they'd have to take out the entire pump. So they were given an extended time period. So I'm sure the identity thieves know this, and that's why they target the gas pumps, and also because they're just out in the open, so it's easier to put those skimming devices on them. But how this is working with legislation now is if you were a victim of fraudulent charges due to a skimming device, and the bank cannot yet issue that new chip and PIN card, then the bank will be liable for any of those fraudulent charges. But if you had that new card and you made a purchase at a store that didn't have those new readers, and you were a victim of fraudulent charges at that store due to a skimming device, now the store will be liable for those fraudulent charges. So they're shifting the responsibility, the liability to the retailers. Yes? Is it a debit or a credit card that you have? It's your credit card. I haven't, at this point, I know they're not requiring the PIN in association with the credit card. And they've talked about moving towards that, but I don't know when that'll happen. So the credit card, there's no, with the debit card, with the chip and PIN card, you are still putting in the PIN. And yeah, and I've read articles where that's what they're thinking of going that way, but I don't know if there's no deadline in place yet that I've seen or anything like that, yeah. Was there any other, yes? Yes, it would be safer to use it inside because, of course, if it's a reader that's behind the counter, it's much less likely that they would have placed a skimming device, paying in cash, checking to see, doing those steps to check to see if there's a skimmer on it. They do have internal skimmers as well, which would be on the inside, so there's no way by pulling, in that case you would know. But all of these gas pumps, they have seals on them. So in order for them to place the internal skimmer on, they would have had to open up the pump. So you would see a broken seal on there. If you see that the pump looks like it has been tampered with in any way, these could be clues that a skimming device has been installed. But of course, paying inside or paying in cash would really be the safest way to avoid the skimming device. Was there any other questions about the skimmers? At the actual post office? Yep, so they're one of the ones that hasn't upgraded yet. A lot of them. So that's where you want to be more careful on those type of machines. And hope, you'd think if it's inside a store, behind a counter, it's not so likely. We still really see them most often on gas pumps. But, other places you might want to be cautious are standalone ATMs that are in a drive-through, those type of places where it would be easier. It'll be safer to use an ATM that is actually inside the bank. So anywhere where it's outdoors and accessible, where it would be easier to put a skimming device. We've seen them recently, one of the Woodmans, not here in Madison, but there was a Woodman's, I can't remember what city, where they put a skimming device on the self-service checkout. So they had gone through the self-service checkout and they installed the skimming device. They caught them, there were cameras, and they have them on. I don't know if they've actually caught them at this point, but they have pictures of the people who did it in their vehicle. So these are the types of places where we see the skimming devices placed more often, or where there's not somebody attending it, they're out in the open. So. Phishing scams, these are the online scams. Have you ever been online and you see a pop-up that says, your computer is infected, click on this link or call this phone number? Or have you ever been online and there's a pop-up that says, you've won a new laptop or an iPad, but just answer these simple survey questions? Or maybe you got an email that said that you have a distant relative who's a foreign diplomat or a prince and they passed away and you inherited millions of dollars. So from the laughing, I'm sure all of you have seen these, and these are all examples of the phishing scams. They're online scams where they want you to click on a link or call a phone number. And just by simply clicking on the link, you could infect your computer with a virus, or else by clicking on the link, it'll redirect you to a page where it wants you to input personal information about yourself. So there's several different versions of the phishing scam. Phishing with a PH, these are the online versions of the phishing scams. But there's also vishing with a V, and there is smishing with an S. So smishing stands for short message service, or these are text messages. And vishing with a V, the V stands for voice, or the fraudulent phone calls, those scam phone calls that you get from time to time. But they call them all phishing because it's like they're throwing a line out there. They want to see who will bite, who will give them the personal information they're looking for, or the money that they're seeking. And these identity thieves, they have the technology. Sometimes they're very sophisticated, and they have the ability to send out thousands of phone calls, thousands of emails, thousands of text messages at once. And although most of us recognize these as scams, we'll delete the email, delete the text message, hang up the phone call, enough people fall for these scams that they will continue to attempt them. And that's why you see so many of them all the time. So I'll give an example where I fell for one of these scams, which is now embarrassing because I give these talks. But in my defense, I was 18 and I was a freshman in college, and it was like my first financial accounts. But as Jack said, I went to University of Washington in Seattle for my undergrad, so I had some of my first financial accounts with Washington Mutual. And I was a student, and I kept getting all of these emails to my student email account from Washington Mutual telling me, you need to update your account now, or we're going to close it. And finally, I thought, oh, I better respond to this because I don't want them to close out my account and I'll lose all my money. Or this is what I thought at the time. So I click on the link in the email, which was my first mistake. And then it redirected me to a website that looks exactly like Washington Mutual's online banking website. And again, they have the ability to do this. They can make it look very authentic. And it said, type in your debit card number here. So I typed in my debit card number. And then I hit next. And then, this is where it gets worse. And then it said, type in your PIN number here. So I typed in my PIN number, and then I hit submit, and then the next screen, all it said was thank you, and that was it. And so at that moment, I knew I had done something wrong, but I wasn't really sure what had happened. And so the next day, I get a phone call from my bank, And they said, Miss Faye, and I said, yes. And they said, did you try to take out $200 from an ATM in Lithuania yesterday? And I said, no, that wasn't me. And they said, well, did you share any personal information about your financial accounts with anyone recently? And I said, yes, but I was too embarrassed to tell anyone, and I didn't know what I had done. And they said, okay, well, don't feel bad. This kind of thing happens, but just know that the bank would never ask you about personal information about your account in that way. And again, going back to the banks really are the first line of defense. So all the banks have their own fraud department, and they know that if I bought lunch at noon in Seattle, there's no way later that afternoon that I'm trying to take out $200 from an ATM in Lithuania. So of course, this is why the bank always asks you to let them know when you'll be traveling and all the different places you'll be going. Because it's in their best interest, because they don't want to take the loss on that fraud, but also for you, to protect you from any fraud that might take place. And then you could be stuck on the other end of it. You could be traveling somewhere and the bank shuts down your card because they think somebody is making fraudulent purchases. So you always want to make sure the moral of that story is let the bank know when you'll be traveling. Low-tech versions of identity theft, stolen wallet or phone. If you simply lose your wallet or your purse with all the information we carry in our wallets, they could get a lot of information about you that way. Or with your phones, nowadays so many of us have smartphones. They've kind of become like another version of our wallets with all the information we have on our phones. So same idea there. And then scams. I'm going to get into the top. We have a top 10 list of scams. I'm only going to go over the top 3 today. So these are the most common scams we see year after year at the Bureau of Consumer Protection. And as I mentioned earlier, identity theft, really, it does affect everyone. Children are the fastest growing group of victims of identity thieves. But scams really target seniors at higher rates. So one of the most popular scams we see year after year is the grandparent scam. Does anybody know someone this has happened to, or maybe it happened to somebody in this room? You want to tell me what happened? Was it a wire transfer, do you know, that he sent? Okay. Yeah, so this is, that's pretty typical of the stories that we hear. And as you said, they knew the name, and they have no idea how, but they knew it. And I don't know in that particular case, but sometimes maybe the grandparents have a profile on some social media site, and people are proud of their grandchildren. They like to show pictures of them, and they might even have the name of the grandchild. So these are some potential ways they could know. So this is pretty typical. You know, they're phone calls out of the blue. I'll share a story. This was a story of someone we saw who fell victim, and they were out a lot of money as a result of this scam. And it was similar to your story. It was a woman who, she received a phone call out of the blue. And in most of the cases, the caller is impersonating the grandchild themselves. But in this case, the caller said that they were a lawyer calling from Peru, and that her grandson had attended a wedding while he was in Peru, and he was involved in a car accident where he had hit a small child, and that child was now in the hospital. And if the grandma didn't send money immediately, it would mean legal consequences for her grandson. So with all of these scams, we see some common themes. They want to scare you into making a payment right there on the spot, kind of bully you, make you think something bad will happen if you don't make that payment. They also told her, you can't tell anyone else about this, or it'll mean more trouble for your grandson. So they don't want her consulting anyone. They don't want her calling her daughter, the mother of the grandchild, or the grandson directly, who's probably fine. He's in his dorm room studying. And then it's always an unusual form of payment they ask for. They ask for a prepaid card, a money order, a wire transfer. They like these forms of payment because they're very difficult to trace. It's essentially like handing over cash. So the grandma's worried about her grandson, and she goes and she sends that wire transfer immediately. Well, these identity thieves, just like the story you told, they thought, okay, we got money out of her one time. Let's see how much more money we can get. So they call her back again. Now the scam has escalated. Now this child who was in the hospital has died. It's local law enforcement who is calling. If the grandma doesn't send more money immediately, her grandson will be arrested and put in jail. So she sends money again. And by the time her daughter intervenes, she finds out what's going on, that her mom is being scammed. She had given $60,000 away to these scammers by wire transfer. And the difficult part about the scam, and why we really like to get the information out there about what scams are going around, is with the identity theft, as we talked about earlier, usually the bank, like with your skimming device, the bank stopped it. They stopped that payment, you weren't out any of the money, and that's what we see in a lot of the cases. If the bank sees, or with my story, If the bank sees some strange or fraudulent charge, they'll usually stop that. But with the scams, if the victim is willingly sending that money away, it's usually very hard to get them that money back once they've fallen victim to these scams. So did you have something to add? No. Another popular one we see, especially during the tax season, is the IRS scam. How many people have been called by the IRS that you owe money on your taxes? You hung up? Has anyone talked to them on these phone calls, or does everybody just hang up? I'm just kind of curious to hear what they said. Nobody? You talked to them? They'll take you in front of the magistrate if you don't pay? And then what did they say? Yeah, so this is a very popular one, and although most of us realize that this is a scam, we hang up right away. People fall for this. Very intelligent people fall for these scams. And we were inundated with phone calls and complaints of this scam because it was so popular last year. And so the way the IRS scam works is exactly like you were describing. They'll call, they'll claim that they're the IRS, you owe money on your taxes, and if you don't pay immediately, there will be legal consequences. We've had some people call in and say that they're very aggressive, even swearing. One woman told us, they said, "We have a sheriff on his way to your house as we speak if you don't pay right now." And people pay. They're scared. They don't want to owe money to the federal government, so they make the payments. And again, they ask for those strange forms of payment, the wire transfer, the prepaid card, the money order. Sometimes we even see them asking for payment via iTunes gift cards, which sounds, of course, crazy, but people fall for it, and they make the payments through these iTunes gift cards. So, of course, the IRS was doing a lot of education about the scam during the time it was taking place. The IRS let people know that the first form of contact through the IRS would never be by phone. It would always be by mail. The IRS would never try to scare you or bully you into making a payment. The IRS would not ask you to pay by a wire transfer or an iTunes gift card. And if you did owe money to the IRS, you would be offered the option to contest that as well. Oh, and another strategy we see with these IRS scams, it's a common strategy with the phone calls and with the emails, the text messages, is they use a strategy called spoofing, where they can make the phone number look like it's coming from wherever they want. So in the case of the IRS scam, in many cases we saw them making the number appear as if it were a 202 area code or a Washington, D.C. area code, so they want to make it look more authentic. And then the tech support scam, also a very popular one. We talked about the pop-ups you see on your computer, but has anybody gotten a call that your computer's infected with a virus? You did? What did they say? Did you talk to them? Oh, so you're used to it. Anybody else actually have an Indian accent too, yeah? From a call center. Yes?
I've been getting this call for about 10 years.
That one?
Yes.
So what was their answer to that once you said you didn't have one? They didn't care. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I've heard that one before too. Then you know right away. So that's how, the Microsoft tech support, how this one works. Again, these are always phone calls just out of the blue. And they'll call and say your computer is infected with a virus. And they'll ask to take remote access of your computer. And I myself am not so tech savvy, but if you give them some sort of a barcode on that computer, they have the ability to do this so they can get onto that computer. So just like if you've ever been working with a tech support person, if you see your mouse moving around, that little arrow's moving around on the screen, they can do this so you think that they're on their computer fixing whatever virus you might have had. And there was no virus in the first place. There was nothing wrong with the computer. And what they're actually doing is searching your computer for any personal or sensitive information, financial information they could find. And in many cases, they will actually infect the computer with a virus when they're on there. And they have these viruses called keystroke loggers, which allow them to continue to monitor any activity on your computer. So any key you press, any website you navigate to, they can see this. So later that day, if you go and you log into your online banking, they've got your username, your password, and access to all of your online banking accounts. And then when they're done doing all of this, they'll charge you some outrageous fee for the service they provided, like $350. So if you ever get any of these type of scam calls, look for those common themes. Are they trying to pressure you into making a payment? Are they asking for those unusual forms of payments? With the Microsoft, we do see, again, a lot of smart people falling for this scam. They don't know. With the pop-ups, with the phone calls, they think, is something really wrong with my computer? Are they really calling to help? And we say, if you're ever unsure about a call that you receive, hang up the phone. Look up the phone number for Microsoft on your own. Do the research. Don't use any of the contact information that they provided you because, of course, that'll also be fraudulent information. Look up that phone number and call Microsoft on your own directly, and they'll let you know, no, we wouldn't contact you in this way. Also, some tips I give people is if you simply just type in that phone number that called you into Google, a lot of times, a lot of forums will pop up where people are talking about how this number called them, and they'll give the scenario, and it's probably pretty similar to the same story that you heard on the phone. So always be wary of any phone calls coming through asking for financial, personal information, or money. Was there? Again, we are not the law enforcement side of it, and we always encourage anyone who gets these fraudulent phone calls to report the numbers to us. We do have investigators who investigate in all of these complaints, and honestly, with those calls, it's very difficult, because as I explained before, the numbers are spoofed. It's usually a dead end if we try to call them back. We enforce the no-call list, and I'll go over that later, because I'm sure people have questions about the no-call list, but it is very difficult to the no-call list is very effective in preventing legitimate telemarketers from calling you, but these identity thieves, they're usually working from overseas. They spoof the phone numbers. They do catch them sometimes. So, for example, with the IRS scam and the tech support scam, the FBI and the Federal Trade Commission were able to find out where those calls were coming from. There were 2 huge call centers coming out of India. And they went in and they shut down the call centers. And I know that several people higher up were arrested. Probably not, I don't know. There are probably thousands of people who were just in the call centers. I don't know what happened to those individuals, but people higher up. So they do catch them from time to time. And so we really saw a decrease in the number of those specific types of scam calls for a while. They did start to pop up again later, because I'm sure another call center popped up somewhere else. But they do catch these guys from time to time. So, was there another question over there?
Yes. Well, I have a question about the call centers, because often very legit calls you get pushed to a call center. Have you ever dealt with call centers that are behind a legitimate operation actually becoming an issue?
Well, I know that a lot of these places do outsource to India, especially, and so a lot of, like AT&T maybe, I don't know what companies in particular. Yeah, and so there are legitimate ones, of course, as well. And so with the scam calls, what we say, if you got a call out of the blue where they're asking for, it seems fishy to you, but if it's a service where you initiated, you called them because you're calling AT&T to talk about your account or someone else, and they send you to a call center. If you initiated the contact, if you're calling a number that you know to be a legitimate contact for whoever the business is, that's probably not a scam in any way. But if you're receiving a call out of the blue trying to get you to purchase a service or get information out of you, that's when you want to be wary of the fraudulent calls. Is that answering the question? In terms of sharing your information, is that what you mean?
Well, sure, because what you're calling about is often a problem with the credit card account or with,
Well, I will go, we're gonna take a break in a minute, but I'm gonna go, in the second half, we'll talk more about the data breaches, and I'll talk about the data breach laws. So I'll explain what is protected under those state laws. Each state has a different data breach law, and I'll get into that. Maybe that'll help answer that a little more. And so I think I'll take a break. We'll take a break now for 10 minutes, and then we'll talk more about the data breaches in the second half. Now we're going to get into, I think, one of the big points of interest of the presentation is the data breaches with everything going on. So I talked about all of these different ways that these identity thieves can get a hold of your information. And of course, one of the other high-tech versions of this identity theft are the data breaches. So this is the actual definition of a data breach. It's an incident in which sensitive, protected, or confidential data has been viewed, stolen, or used by an individual unauthorized to do so. So the question was that she has heard of people swiping your credit card or debit card through your purse or your wallet. And it does exist. I do not hear about it too often, but these would be handheld skimmers. So one place we hear about these a lot more often is in airports. So for example, if I'm a woman carrying my purse and some guy could walk by me with be walking with his briefcase like this, I think nothing of it. Maybe he has a handheld skimmer in that briefcase, and he skims the information from my cards that are inside of my purse. So now they sell these products. They're called RFID products. They have them as purses, wallets, little sleeves, where you can put your cards into those, and they're lined with some sort of metal, and it's supposed to mess with these handheld skimmers or with the signal so they can't get the information off of them. So from time to time, I get questions about those products. And we're not really supposed to promote any sort of products that are out there. Since I got so many questions on them, I read a lot of articles about them, and they rated, and I don't even know what all the brands are that are out there, but they've rated different brands. But from everything I read, they said, if you just took tin foil and made a little sleeve with some tin foil and put your card in there, that would be just as effective as any of the products that are out there. But so it can happen. I don't think you would necessarily just need to be worried about this on a day-to-day basis, but we've heard of it, and I know what you're talking about in those products that are out there. So the next slide on there is showing states with data breach laws. And so all the states, the ones that look darker are in red on my PowerPoint. Those are the 3 states that do not currently have data breach laws enacted, although this should really be updated because New Mexico just passed legislation, so they now will have a data breach law enacted. So 48 states currently have data breach laws in place. The ones that do not are Alabama and South Dakota. So all the other 48 states have data breach laws currently. The provisions of these data breach laws can vary from state to state, but the basic provisions are generally the same, and that would be who falls under these data breach laws, businesses, information brokers, government agencies as being required to report under these data breach laws, what constitutes as personally identifiable information. So the list under the data breach law is pretty similar to the list I went over at the beginning for that identity theft Wisconsin state statute. Obligation to notify. This can vary by state to state. In Wisconsin, under our Wisconsin state data breach law, any business or government entity, any organization that has suffered a data breach and as a result, the personal information of their clients or consumers was affected, they are required to notify of any unauthorized acquisition of personal information within 45 days of learning of the breach. That's from when they learn of the breach. So there's a research institute called the Ponemon Research Institute that they research these data breaches and the cost to the businesses and losses related to these data breaches. And according to their research and their studies, on average, it takes a business, on average, 166 days to realize that they've suffered a data breach. And then on average, 70 days to contain the breach. So this can vary depending on what type of breach it is, but that's the average. So in Wisconsin, there's a 45-day obligation to notify under our Wisconsin state data breach law. So then if you look at the next one, it goes into the details of our state law. It applies to most businesses and public sector organizations. Our state law does not apply to certain financial institutions, health plan providers. So for healthcare institutions, they are regulated under HIPAA. So HIPAA would be federally regulated. That would be one notification to the Federal Trade Commission. And for financial institutions, they are also federally regulated under the Graham-Bliley-Leach Act. Again, that would be one notification to the Federal Trade Commission. Yes. So for example, we'll see data breaches. I'm trying to think of an example I can give you. Let's use Sonic. Sonic drive-thru recently had a data breach, and I post on all of these data breaches. So if you ever go to our website, we have a running list of all the data breaches that are out there. Sometimes they're local, they're Wisconsin businesses, sometimes they're national, but any data breach that has impacted Wisconsin consumers. So those people, and I give this presentation on the business side as well, and that's really oriented towards data breaches, data breach awareness, and security for businesses, so businesses know what steps to take and how to protect their personal information. And so that's usually with Chamber of Commerce around the state, and I always let them know when I'm going over the provisions. I say, in Wisconsin, these are our regulations, but if you work with consumers or clients or businesses in any other states, you would need to be aware of what their data breach laws are as well. So if they have a different obligation to notify. So Sonic, I can't remember where Sonic is headquartered, but Sonic, not in Wisconsin, and it affected, so they would still have to look at what Wisconsin's laws are and notify accordingly. Let's see, and then it requires a business to notify consumers of unauthorized acquisition of personal information. So in any case, there was an unauthorized acquisition of that personal information, they would be required to notify all of the consumers who were affected by that. And there are some exemptions to the data breach law. So there are some exemptions to this notification rule. If there was a data breach, but the information did not cause a material risk of identity theft, in other words, maybe it was downloaded, but there was no way they could access that information. There was no way they could use that information to commit fraud or identity theft. That would not fall under a data breach according to our state law. If the information they acquired was encrypted, redacted, or otherwise altered or rendered unreadable by an identity thief who was able to get a hold of that information, that would not constitute a data breach. Or if the information they got a hold of was already publicly available information that they could have accessed otherwise publicly, that does not constitute a data breach. Or if the information was acquired by an agent, law enforcement agent, or an agent of the business and used for lawful legal purposes, that would not constitute a data breach. So those are some exemptions under our state law. Looking at the Equifax data breach specifically, because I'm sure people have a lot of questions related to that, Equifax reported this data breach on September 7th of 2017. That's when they notified the public of the data breach. The data breach took place back in July, late July till, let's say, late June to mid-July, I believe, of 2017. So it took them a while to notify. Now, the credit reporting agencies, they're regulated under the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the regulations under the CFPB are not as strict as the regulations for the banks. So they're not as strictly regulated as the banking institutions, for example. With the Equifax data breach, the personal information of 145.5 million Americans was compromised. So when they initially notified of the data breach, they said it was 143 million, and then they completed their final report or analysis of this data breach, and they discovered 2.5 additional people were affected by this data breach. The data breach got all the big pieces of information that you wouldn't want them to get. They got your name, address, social security number, and date of birth. In certain cases, they got credit card numbers as well, but actually that was pretty small compared to the total number. The total number was 145.5 million. The number of credit cards that were accessed was 209,000. And in certain cases, they got a hold of driver's license information, but also small numbers of that. With the Equifax data breach, it was an attack on one of their web applications. It was an online dispute portal. And if you go to their website, they do have a pretty in-depth explanation of that. I don't understand a lot of the words in there because I'm not an IT person, but it talks about all the different applications. Maybe you understand that better. But it talks about all the types of applications and how they got into it. But it was an attack on one of the web applications of Equifax that was an online dispute portal. So web application attacks are one of the common types of data breaches that we see. So that 145.5 million, that's 44% of all Americans. So roughly half of the people in this room were probably affected by this data breach. And I already went over the personal information that they acquired. So what Equifax has done in response to this data breach is they are offering free credit monitoring to all consumers. That's anyone, whether affected by the breach or not. So in answer to your question, we do recommend that you take advantage. It's a free credit monitoring that's out there. Take advantage of that credit monitoring service. Early on, there was language put into this that if you were going to accept that you were waiving your rights to arbitration as a result of being victimized by this data breach. That's no longer the case. That has been taken out. So you're still safe to sign up for that free credit monitoring. They are also offering free credit freezes. And I told Jack I really wanted to make sure we set up this presentation as soon as possible because the freezes are only being offered through January 31st of 2018. So if you want to take advantage of those free credit freezes, you'll need to do that you have until January 31st of next year to sign up for those free credit freezes. Going back to your question about you and your wife, so if you're married, really both spouses would want to put that freeze on their credit reports. Let's see, what else? They have established a dedicated call center, so I have the number listed there on your sheet, as well as a website for you to go to. So if you were affected by the data breach, they have sent out some notification letters. From what I heard, it really isn't that. Has anyone in here received a notification letter by mail? A few people have. I believe from what I read, they only sent that out to the additional 2.5 million that they discovered later on. So in the scheme of things, not that many people will actually receive a letter by mail. So the main way to check is to go to that website. I have written down the link here if you have not already done so. Of course, if you just type in Equifax and go to their main site, it's still their main page that is up there, but this is the actual site to go to. Yes?
When you do a credit freeze, what happens? Does that mean you can't get any more credit, or?
Well, I'll go over the credit freeze now. I have a later slide, so I'll kind of just go through it quickly then. So the credit freeze completely blocks any new credit from being opened up under your name. That means including to yourself. So I always tell people it's important to think about what stage of your life you're in. If you need to access credit, you'll be buying a home, you're taking out a loan for a car, it might not be the best option for you, but if you just want peace of mind that no one can touch your credit report, the credit freeze is really the best thing you can do to protect your credit report and prevent identity theft from happening. It completely blocks any new credit from being opened up under your name. It does cost $10 to put on with each agency, and you need to contact each agency individually. So there's 3 credit reporting agencies. There's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Equifax, as we've discussed, they'll offer that free freeze through January 31st, but you really need to do it with all 3 or it'll not be effective. So they're only offering that free freeze through Equifax. You would still need to pay for the other 2. If you do have a police report stating you're a victim of identity theft, all the fees related to the freeze will be waived. When you place the freeze, they'll give you a PIN number. So at any time you want to lift or thaw the freeze, or you could do a temporary lift. Let's say you decide you want to buy a car, you have a freeze on your account. You can request that temporary lift and apply for that loan. However, there is a fee associated with it anytime you want to lift the freeze. So it's another $10. Each state has different fees related to the freezes. The maximum you can charge for a freeze is $10. That's what Wisconsin charges, $10. Some states are free. In the wake of these breaches, there's a lot of proposed legislation in Wisconsin. They're discussing making freezes free for all. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully that happens, but that's just in the works as of now. As of 2014, also they extended the freezes to minors. So any parents or legal guardians of a minor can put the freeze on the report of a child. And at any point that child turns 18 or wants to apply for credit of their own, in that case, the parent will be given the PIN number and the parent can lift the freeze. Yes?
Quick question. If you've done the freeze previous to the Equifax breach, which we did, we paid $60 about 2 years ago because of the Anthem federal employee insurance breach. And we've never lifted it. Does the freeze just continue on indefinitely? Or is it going to expire in 2 years or 5 years or at some time?
So the question was, they put the freeze on 2 years ago and they paid the $60 for the 2 of them, and will they have to renew the freeze at any point? The freeze is permanently effective until you lift or thaw that freeze. You can do a temporary lift, so you can just lift it if you need to access credit for some reason, or you could permanently lift it. And then you, at some point, have to put it on. When you temporary lift, you're just doing the $10. You're not paying to lift and then put it on again. You just pay the $10 for the temporary lift. And then it'll be a certain, like a 30-day time frame that you can do that. Was there any other questions related to the freeze? Yes. The PIN associated with the credit freeze. So he said they never change the PIN, so if you lose it or forget it, is there anything you can do? I believe that you would have to contact them, and then they will probably ask you some questions to verify your identity. I think with any, like an account retrieval, I think they would ask you some identifying questions to verify that you are really who you say you are, to give you that PIN number. Any other? Yes? What you were asking was when you try to place them and you have security questions and they're telling you that the answers to the security questions are wrong. So are these like the typical security questions, like your mother's maiden name or what town were you born in, or and what was the name of the first pet? I mean, or stuffed animal? You'd think that's something you would have set up at some point, but I have heard they can be difficult sometimes, you know, to deal with or contact. There's 3 credit reporting agencies for everyone. So especially, of course, one issue with when all this took place with Equifax is people couldn't get through to the website. It was down. They couldn't get a hold of anyone. Equifax hired 2,000 more people to work at their call center for people who were calling in. So they were overwhelmed, and these are huge organizations that maintain information of millions of Americans. So I know that they can be hard to deal with and get a hold of or ever actually talk to a person. I have heard that before. Yeah, we'll go here and then over here.
Do you know if they've ever found any responsible parties for that?
No, not that I have seen. Yes.
Does it strike anyone else odd that it says, what information do I have to provide to get my free credit report? Name, address, social security number, and date of birth.
To Equifax? Who compromised all that information? Is that the concern? Yeah, people are worried about having to supply this information, or when you go to that Equifax security2017.com site, they'll ask you for your name and the last 6 digits of your social security number, and then people say, I don't want to give that, they just compromised all my information, which is understandable, but that's really the only way you can check, and Equifax really has all of that information on you already. And I understand, especially in this age of all of these data breaches, that people are concerned about sharing your personal information. And all I can say is I'll go over the prevention tips and things you can do. And I think you can do all the best steps you can take to protect your personal information and prevent this from happening. But they say nowadays you kind of want to just operate in the mode of thinking that your personal information is probably out there somewhere. It has probably been compromised at some point. But you can take these steps to be more vigilant in protecting it and preventing any fraud from happening. Yeah.
How do you deal with the issue of you applying for other things and they all use the credit bureau's questions? Like I applied for a Delta card. They asked me 2 questions. One was my paternal grandmother, who I never met, never knew, never anything. And I said, I don't know this. He says, well, we get these from Experian or TransUnion, one of them. A lot of these companies, and Revenue did it. I know Revenue used to use, for ID purposes, they used questions from the credit bureau.
So these are still issues, the security question issues that are resulting from the credit bureaus. Do a lot of people have this same issue? Is this I haven't heard of it. I'm just curious if this is happening to
A lot of companies use ID.
Well, the security questions, but that the answers are not correct with what you know the answers to be.
Never given an answer. Never given an answer. I didn't know who my paternal grandmother was.
The only solution I could give to that would be contacting them directly to see how you could reestablish those security questions. The question was, is there a lot more fraud resulting as a result of these data breaches in 2017? And the answer is, I'm not sure yet, because the Federal Trade Commission puts out a report on all of that information, but they usually don't come out until March. So I'm not sure on the exact statistics of it. With the data breaches, as I was explaining earlier, in a lot of the cases that I have seen with the data breaches, people are not actually out money. Either the bank stops it, or with some of the financials, with the Target, for example, those were credit and debit cards. That was simpler because they could close out all of those credit and debit cards and reissue them to people whose information was compromised in the Target breach. With this breach, it is more sensitive information that was compromised. And so they got a hold of your social security number. They got a hold of your date of birth. They could open up credit accounts in your name, which is why we're suggesting to put the freeze on. If you put the freeze on, they cannot open up any new credit accounts under your name. That doesn't affect your existing credit. They could, what you have already out there could be impacted, but they can't open up any new accounts.
But your recommendation to us is to make sure we do it for all 3.
Right. And your wife too, yeah. Right, yes. If you have the police report, use that, and then you can waive all the fees related to it as well. Okay, so, sorry, this was jumping ahead of me, but I wanted just to go back to one quick, because I skipped this. This is just showing some of the data breaches that affected Wisconsin consumers in 2016. So this is just a sampling of them. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, total in 2016, there were 1,093 reported data breaches. So this is just some of the more well-known ones in Wisconsin. We had many more of organizations and businesses you probably haven't heard of, but this is just some of the more popular ones, some based in Wisconsin, some not, but affecting Wisconsin consumers. They have, the Identity Theft Resource Center has a running total of all of these breaches, and for 2017, well, we only have a few more weeks, but I think we're at 1,200 and some. So we're already above where we were last year. So these seem to be increasing every year. So warning signs, ways you might be able to tell that identity theft is taking place on your accounts. You can go to ssa.gov with the Social Security Administration and create a profile there and check your earnings statement with the Social Security Administration to make sure that no one is using your Social Security number for employment purposes or any sort of benefits. If you see anything out of line or fishy there, this could be a sign of identity theft. If you discover any unauthorized charges or lines of credit on any of your accounts, your various financial accounts, this could be a sign of identity theft. If you are denied credit when you should have good credit, so you've always been in good credit standing, you have a good credit score, you go to apply for a loan or a line of credit, and you're denied credit. This could be a sign of identity theft. If you receive an unsolicited change of address form in the mail from the post office, this is a strategy that identity thieves use. They're trying to reroute your mail. They don't want you to receive any of the bills or the collection notices coming from the collection companies because they run up debt under your name. So if you ever receive a change of address form in the mail, you're not moving, you didn't request one, this could be a sign of identity theft. If checking your explanation of benefits with the insurance company to make sure that all the different appointments you went to at the different clinics on the dates that you went to them really match up with the time that you went to the doctor. If you see anything fishy or out of line there, could be a sign of identity theft. If you receive a notice from the IRS, and this would be a legitimate notice from the IRS notifying you that someone has filed for your tax return before you've had a chance to do so, this could be a sign of identity theft as well. Or if you're receiving suspicious phone calls, these would be legitimate phone calls from actual debt collectors calling to collect on a debt that an identity thief has incurred using your personal information. So prevention tips, and one of the handouts I have here today, this blue one here, this blue flyer, this really goes over all of the prevention tips I'm going to cover. It has all of the contact information, phone numbers, websites that are available. So I was talking to some people at the break about the no-call list, but how many people here are registered with the no-call list? Okay, how many of you still get phone calls you don't want to receive? Everybody? Okay. So there are some exemptions to the no-call list. Certain people can still get through. Those are political survey calls. They can still call you. Non-for-profit charities can still call. Somebody doing business on their own behalf or someone you have already established a business relationship with. The no-call list, it is very, as I mentioned earlier, it's very effective in preventing legitimate telemarketers from calling you. But with these scammers, the fraudulent phone calls, in many cases they're working from overseas, they're criminals, they don't care about the Wisconsin state statutes that regulate the no-call list. They're gonna call you anyways. So we say that if you're registered on the no-call list, and if you have caller ID on your phone, you can see these numbers coming in. If you see numbers you don't recognize, the best thing to do is to not answer those phone calls at all. Because these identity thieves, as I mentioned earlier, they can send out thousands of phone calls at once. So they have lists of all of these numbers, and they're actually just machines that are auto-dialing. They don't even know if all of these are legitimate numbers. So if they continue to call a number where they never actually get a live person on the end of that number, eventually they'll take that number off their list. So some people were telling me at the break that they like to kind of mess with the callers or make them mad or make them wait on the phone, which is kind of fun to do. But really the best thing is to not answer these calls at all. Shredding anything that has sensitive or personal information on it when you're done using it and before you throw it away to prevent that dumpster diving form of identity theft. Sending anything with sensitive or personal information directly from the post office as opposed to your home mailbox. Because we say if you put that little red flag up to let the identity thieves know or to let the postman know that there's mail inside, then you're also letting those identity thieves know there's mail inside and they could come and steal it. You can opt out of pre-approved credit cards or insurance offers. So this will really limit that amount of junk mail you get in your mailbox and again, prevent that stolen mail form of identity theft. Again, the information about how to do that is all in this little flyer here that you can do it by phone or online. With your wallet, knowing what's in your wallet, taking an inventory of all the information you carry in there. You don't want to carry too many different credit and debit cards. You never want to carry your social security card on you. You never want to carry your passport on you. The Medicare card, the identifier on there is the social security number with just a letter on the end. And of course, they realize this is a privacy issue, so they will be reissuing all new cards, but that's supposed to take up to 2 years. So I don't know where they're at in that process right now. But in Madison, there's a nonprofit that deals specifically with the Medicare fraud. And their suggestion is to make a copy of that Medicare card, keep the original somewhere safe, locked away at home, and on the copy you can block out the number on there or just leave the last 4, and then you can carry the copy with you. Some more prevention tips with Wi-Fi. There are things you can do to best secure your home Wi-Fi network. Always keep the browser updated. Install anti-malware and spyware. Install a firewall. So these are things you can do to best secure your home Wi-Fi network. If you'll be out on public Wi-Fi network, it's best to use a password-secure network, somewhere where you will have to type in a password to gain access to that network. If you will be on a public unsecure Wi-Fi network, you're at a hotel or a coffee shop and you want to access the Wi-Fi and it's not password secured, then my suggestion would be just not to access anything containing sensitive or personal information. So for example, if you're on a public unsecured network, maybe not the best idea to be doing your online banking on that network. Was there a question here? The question was, can I go over the password? So I'll do social security number and then I'll talk about creating strong passwords. Also, if you're on a public unsecure network, there are things you can do on your website to check if a website is secure. So if you look at the top of the page where the URL is, you know how it always starts with HTTP? So if you see HTTP with an S on the end, the S stands for secure. That means it's a secure, encrypted website. So if anyone was able to hack in and gain access to your session online, it would be encrypted information. It would look like a code. Other clues you might see are a little gray padlock at the top of the page. You often see this on government websites, anywhere where you're making an online bill pay. If you like to shop online, like Amazon or eBay, that little gray padlock is a sign of a secure, encrypted website. So anywhere where you're inputting your financial information, these should be secure, encrypted websites. However, you still want to look for those clues at the top of the web page on any web page you're on. Oh, sorry. With your social security number, nowadays so many different people ask for that number on so many different applications and for different services that you want to access. So we always say if they're requesting that number, ask a lot of questions. Why do they need it? How will they use it? How will they store and protect that number? What will they do with it when they're done using it? How will they dispose of it? Is there another number you could give in place of the social security number or potentially just the last 4 digits of that number? With passwords, going back to the password question, our motto is long and strong, a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers and symbols, different passwords for your different accounts, and changing those passwords every so often, and not sharing those passwords with anyone. Did you have any other questions about the password in particular? Is it do you log into it with your own password, or is it the network password that you're referring to? When you log into the Oakwood network, she was wondering about the login password that you use to gain access to the network here at Oakwood. Is that right? When you're entering in a password when you go on the internet here? And so how does that work? Is it on an individual basis, or is everyone using the same password?
I wonder if anybody using Oakwood uses a virtual private network for the security. I've never used one, but you phones and someone have those. Yeah,
you can. Does anyone here at Oakwood use a VPN, a virtual private network? And the virtual private network is very secure because it is your own Wi-Fi connection that you're logging into with your own personal information. But as of how they works at Oakwood, I'm not sure. I'm there's, hopefully there might be someone here to ask about who is, and then I would ask how that works with the password and the Wi-Fi. Social networking, we went over that earlier, but that's just being aware of what information you're sharing about yourself online, not sharing too much information about yourself. All of these sites have privacy policies, so again, reading those privacy policies, understanding them, and how you can limit what information you share and who has access to that information. If you did a simple Google search of yourself, what kind of information could you find out about yourself? So limiting what you're sharing online. And this is just about, so I really went over the credit freeze. I went over all the points of the credit freeze. The fraud alert is another additional step you could take. It's not as secure as the credit freeze. It's extra verification at any time anyone wants to take out credit on your name. The creditors have to take extra steps to verify that the person applying for the credit is really who they say they are. It is free to do. It is good for 90 days, but then you would have to renew it. You just need to contact one of the credit reporting agencies, and again, there's three. There's Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, and they will communicate between the three. Again, if you have a police report stating that you're a victim of identity theft, then it can be, that fraud alert can be extended for 7 years. So finally, if you are a victim of identity theft, you want to report fraudulent charges on your account. Report those fraudulent charges to the bank, close out any related accounts, open up new accounts with new numbers and new cards attached to those accounts. By law, you are entitled to 1 free credit report a year from each one of the credit reporting agencies. Again, there's 3. And this is under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So you can be rotating, checking your credit 3 times a year, every 4 months to make sure that everything looks okay on your credit report. If you see anything out of line there, that could be a sign of identity theft. You can place that fraud alert or security freeze, whatever might work best for you. We encourage all victims of identity theft to file a police report. The police report really helps with the overall recovery process and with a lot of the fee waivers that are out there for resources of victims of identity theft. You can contact us at the Bureau of Consumer Protection. And of all the handouts I brought today, all of our contact information is on the back of those. It has our website, our email address, our hotline phone number. So if you were ever a victim of identity theft, you can contact us, and we have investigators who will investigate and mediate that complaint on your behalf, or any of the other consumer-related topics I mentioned earlier. And then finally, you'd want to file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. That, in combination with the police report, is what you'll go online and fill out what's called an affidavit of identity theft. And that, in combination with the police report, is what makes up the identity theft report. And that wraps up the presentation for today. There's some more questions?
Talking about the identity theft and a police report, do you have to have an actual damage where they've tried to do it so the Equifax in and of itself would not
Exactly.
qualify?
You do need, they're actually, so as I mentioned earlier, with the data breaches, you are not yet a victim of identity theft. The information is out there, but it hasn't been used. So it would have to have been used. They attempted to open up some sort of fraudulent account. If not, then there wouldn't be identity theft at that point.
You've already told us that your department does not handle enforcement, and by show of hands, you found that most of us have been bothered by unsolicited calls for this and that. What stats or information can you give us to show that these are followed up on by whoever does the enforcement, and that there's fines levied and people punished for the unsolicited calls?
There are fines. I don't have any statistics here with me. I could explain how the process of it works. So if you would have to, if you're a business in Wisconsin, you're contacting people, you would have to register with the no-call list. And then anybody who places their phone number on the do not call list, those businesses cannot call you. And if they are, and if there are, and this would go up to our legal department, but if there's so many instances, they can be fined, and we have fined people, and it's a certain amount per call. And I could try to get that information for you. I can answer that later. I'd have to follow up with our bureau director to get actual statistics on it, but we do fine businesses who are in violation of the no-call rule.
Back on an earlier slide, you showed a URL for the Equifax Security 2017 website. back when that was first reported, I went to that and submitted my name, and it said, yeah, I was possibly impacted. So then I decided to do a test where I entered the name Wile E. Coyote, Madison, Wisconsin, and it said, yes, you were possibly impacted. So.
Yeah, I did hear that when that first occurred, they were having a lot of issues with the website and that people were putting in contradicting information, and it would still give you some sort of an answer. I think that all of that should be fixed at this point. So if you go in now, it should give you the correct information. But at this point, unless you've received a notification letter, that is the only way to check that your information was impacted.
We'll continue with questions, but let's thank Laura for her presentation today.
Thank you.
This is along the same lines as some of the other questions about the Equifax breach. Do you know if, or has there been any information that Equifax didn't have an appropriate level of security for their humongous databases, and whether they were somehow, you know, I don't want to say at fault, but that if they had had better systems, it wouldn't have occurred? Or is it being viewed that this was just so dastardly by these people that have the capacity to do the breaches that really Equifax was sort of innocent? I'm not saying it exactly right, but...
No, I think the first thing you said might be more accurate because there was a lot of information out there that they were notified, and they were notified by Homeland Security, and there was some vulnerability in this web application, and they knew about it, and they didn't take the steps they needed to close it. So there have been many people who have resigned from Equifax. They've had new CEOs of the security and IT in place. So no, I don't think Equifax is being seen as the victim in this case, and I think that there was a lot of criticism about how they dealt with it after the breach occurred.
I have a quick question and a comment. I'm confused about the no-call list. We used to have to renew it. How long?
It's permanent now. You do not have to renew it.
It's permanent, okay.
If you were unsure, you can always go online and just type in the phone number to make sure you're still registered if it was from before that point, or you could call. You want to call from the number that you would like to register.
Okay, and then on this information, you give the Motor Vehicle Bureau as a place to contact. A couple of years ago, I contacted them, they never responded. I contacted them again, they never responded. And then I happened to be in there, and the person at the desk contacted them and said, oh, you'll hear from them. And I never did, and I gave up. I'm just mentioning that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was your driver's license information compromised in some way? Were you calling them about identity theft? Because the information I have here about the DMV would only be if somebody got a hold of your driver's license number that shouldn't have had it and they were trying to use that number. So then you'd put a flag on there. And this would be the specific number to call in terms of identity theft. So who has your driver's license number? I think unless, you wouldn't just assume that unless you saw something that came up, something fraudulent, or if you knew for a fact that somebody got a hold of it, or your purse was stolen and it had your driver's license in there, something like that, then you'd want to contact them.
You mentioned that Equifax probably didn't have great security over this data. Do we know if the other two credit bureaus have better security?
I hope so. I mean, it's hard, it's hard to say, because with all of these, and I went over the data breach law and what the requirements are for the states. In terms of the CFPB, that's another agency, and you would hope so, and it's in their best interest, because look at all what's happened with Equifax. But it's hard because all of these businesses, they can take all the best steps they can to prevent these data breaches in terms of IT and security of their websites. But they can do all of those things, and one data breach that we've seen that's been a popular trend recently is it's a phishing scam where someone will pose as the CEO of an organization, or this is what happened in Milwaukee Bucks. If you saw, I had them listed as one of the bad breaches in Wisconsin. They posed as the CEO of the Milwaukee Bucks. They sent an email to an employee in the Human Resources Department asking for the W-2 information of all of those employees. they thought it was really their boss, so they sent that information off and it was the identity thief. So the business, they can do all the best work they can to protect that information in terms of IT and security, and then an employee could accidentally post something publicly that was supposed to be private information. So I can't answer that question 100%. You can just hope that they're doing their best job, and then you're taking your steps that you can to secure your information as well.
We got the initial notice from Equifax saying we were likely implicated or impacted. We sent in the last numbers of our social security number, and then they came back to us and said, yes, you were part of the hack. So now go to this other form, fill out this information, send it in, and you'll be eligible for those specific protections that they've decided to put in place. We both filled it out. I went back later and filled it out again, and we've never received any acknowledgement from Equifax that they received any of our thing, and I guess I'm starting to wonder, does that mean we're not covered? I think I'm going to just get my Bluetooth in and sit on their phone line for a while.
So you filled out the credit monitoring and for the freeze, and then did they say they'd get back in contact with you?
Yeah,
or what
they said you'd receive an email acknowledging it, and I have looked through. Admittedly, my computer has decided to put things in strange places sometime, but I looked through every single solitary email, including spam, junk, everything like that, never received anything. So I did it again, and it was the same issue. And David filled his out. He didn't get anything back either.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I heard they have been slow in getting to this. I have a coworker who did it, and he said he eventually did get confirmation, but it took a while.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get my Bluetooth and just sit and play solitaire until they answer my call. And so if I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
My daughter lives in Canada, and they're busy with their family. Their issue was a financial case where the stocks that they held at ComputerServe, the state of New Jersey, because they hadn't responded to voting your proxy shares in 2 companies, the state of New Jersey this last year seized their stock as inactive. So it's just a warning to people, in today's world, you don't get reports, but you get these emails saying, vote your stock. And I think that's important too, because I think the main thing I see is that we don't get reports, and you have to watch both your credit reports and these issues.
Okay, thank you.
There are various companies, some of them actually advertise on TV, that say that they're going to help you with securing your online data that aren't any of these credit bureaus, but other independent organizations, I think. Are they any good? Is that really worth paying?
Like LifeLock or
yes,
something like
exactly.
that? Well, all of those, there's a lot of them out there, and I think that would be a matter of researching and seeing which one, you know, like a buyer beware. They're all legitimate. They're legitimate companies. Jack.
Let me rephrase
okay.
the question, because I'm asking you to make a judgment that probably you don't want to make. What do they actually do?
They're credit monitoring services, so they will not stop anything from happening. They will just alert you if there was some sort of fraudulent activity on your account. So I believe that a lot of the things that they offer, where you'd pay a monthly fee, I think, for those services, you can do a lot of those things on your own.
So why would AT&T need my social security number to change my landline to a UVerse?
So AT&T is requesting your social security number, and you want to know if this is legitimate. We get a lot of calls related to those type of issues. As I was mentioned with the social security portion of the prevention tips, nowadays so many people ask you for it, and should you give it out, who do you give it to, why? I remember I had somebody living up in Bayfield who called, and he wanted cable. And I don't remember what the company was in Bayfield, but they asked for his social security number, and he was upset. He didn't want to have to give that number out. which is fine, but that might mean he doesn't get the cable. So they can, these businesses, they can ask for your social security number. There's nothing against the law, or there's no state statutes preventing them from doing that. Most cases they want it because they're just looking at your credit report. They want to make sure you'll be making your monthly payments on time. So they're asking for it for legitimate purposes, but then whether you want to, you know, that's understandable if you don't want to share the number, but it might mean that you don't get that service then. But you could also ask, you could ask them, can I give a number in place of that? Could I just share the last four? Would that be good enough? So you can always ask those questions. Sometimes it works, so.
Okay, all done? Very good. Thank you very much. And Laura, thank you again.
Thank you.
We're pretty much spread out here. But